Hello and welcome back. Thanks for tuning in. For those of you that are wondering why I am sat at my dining table and not in my car, it is simply because I am not driving anywhere today. I'm working from home and I have very little time to record this video, and I made a commitment to record those videos regularly. So I'm going to have some lunch, so feel free to join me and we are going to chat about a topic that I think is worth discussing, because I think it's quite relevant to a video that I posted a couple of days ago about my experience with anxiety and where I thought the roots of that came from. And that topic is it a good idea to delve into our past to unearth the reasons why we think we are the way we are? Or is it better to just focus on the future and let sleeping dogs lie? I want to start by saying I don't really have a clear answer to this, and that's simply because there have been times in my life where it has been both yes and no. So the argument for no, as in it is not better to delve into our past, is that I guess it doesn't really make much of a difference, right? Whatever happened to you in your past doesn't necessarily have to dictate your future unless you let it. For instance, I could spend hours, days, months, years unpacking all of the traumas that happened to me and my younger self, or the past version of myself, and ultimately you can argue that it wouldn't make any difference because that's all happened in the past and there is nothing that you can do to change it. And it's logical that the only thing that's going to make any difference now is the actions that you do from this point forwards. And I get that to a certain extent. I'm someone that can spend a lot of time in their own heads, and I do tend to ruminate on the past. I think about the past a lot, and I think about all of the things that I could have done better. I think about all the conversations I've had where I should have said something else. By the way, there's a really cool French phrase called esprit d'escalier, which means spirit of the staircase when it's like literally translated into English. And all it means is those times where you've been having an altercation or a verbal argument with someone, and you think of something really witty and clever to say after the argument's happened. And I love that because that happens to me all the time, especially in verbal confrontations, because I hate confrontation, and so I get very much in my own head, and I can have very clear and articulate arguments with people in my own head, which I quite often do. But yeah, I just love the fact the French have got a phrase that actually encapsulates that whole thing. But back to the point. Thinking about the past and ruminating on all the things that have happened in my life, there's only so much of it you can actually do. There's only so many times you can run over the same events in your head. And actually, I think the function of that, I think the reason we do that in our head so often is our brain is trying to point out a mistake that we made at the time. Mistakes aren't a bad thing at all because they're an opportunity to learn. So what I found and what I'm finding recently is that if I do find myself ruminating on things that have happened in the past, to try and ask myself why, what it is that I'm trying to learn from that memory. And more often than not, I'll find that it's something along the lines of like, I didn't stand up for myself, I didn't set boundaries, I was disrespected by that person and I didn't tell them, or I was like untrue to my values. So I know, generally speaking, I'm quite a kind person, but if I've ever done something that's quite selfish, I almost feel embarrassed about it. I'll give you a prime example. I have this philosophy that if you're in a position to help people, then you should. And I think it's your responsibility as a human being to help people. And so quite often, if I see someone broken down on the side of the road, even though most people have breakdown recovery these days, I will stop. And if I've driven past that person, more often than not, I have this attack of consciousness, and I have to go back. So I will drive back 10 minutes to that person just to pull over and ask them if they're okay. For all I know, they may have no phone signal or their phone's died and they've got no means of calling someone to help pick them up. So they could use my phone. Years and years ago, I ended up towing someone. So because I'm in a position to help that person, I feel like it's my responsibility to do that. And I've gone off on such a tangent, I don't even remember the original point. Dwelling, lessons learned, yeah. So there was one occasion, the only occasion, where I've ever driven past someone and not stopped to ask them if they're all right. And to this day, that still winds me up. I still remember that memory in detail. But when I actually unpacked it, when I realised why these thoughts were going around in my head so often, this particular thought, it was because I wasn't being true to my value. So my point being is, if you are having these repetitive thoughts, yes, it's good, I think, sometimes to look back on them and wonder why it is you're having them, particularly about past events. And but once you've worked out what it is about that thing, then you need to take action. And the next time you're in a similar situation, you need to apply that lesson that you've learned. And for me, when I've done that, I find that these repetitive thoughts in those particular circumstances lessen. I have much, much less of them. So that's something worth trying. So that's the argument for no, I guess, is we don't necessarily need to dwell on events and things that happened in our past, because ultimately they make no difference to what choices we make now and therefore our future selves. And I think that's a strong argument. That makes a lot of sense. But on the other hand, I have been quite open on this channel about my experiences with counselling and therapy and CBT and all of those things. And I have also found all of those things hugely helpful. And I would fully recommend that if you're feeling a bit stuck in life, or if you're in a bad place, that you should speak to someone that is qualified to help you out with those things, particularly if you're experiencing things like anxiety and depression. And it is so helpful to speak to someone that is unbiased. And I always felt when I was speaking to people that, particularly like friends and family, about issues that I was having, that I almost felt this sense that I didn't want to burden them. And so I would never be totally upfront and honest about what was happening in my head. But when you have a therapist, it's different, because you are paying them to listen to you. And so for me, at least, that guilt was gone. And I was able to really talk about what was going on in my head. And what a good therapist can do is help you to understand why you are feeling the way you're feeling. And I think we do need to cast our eye back into the past to work that out, because for me, there's a lot of repetitive patterns that were going on in my life, like these cyclical instances. I would do the same sort of thing in like a year-long cycle. So like, come January, it wasn't even January, it was like this time of year, I think, like October, November, I would start to get super motivated, and I'd start setting my goals, and I'd know exactly what I was doing. And then within a few months, I don't know what changed, but suddenly I was feeling shit. And when I look back on my my journal, which again is really useful to keep, to see these patterns in your life, when I look back on my journal, I realised that I was doing the same things again and again and again every single year. And I needed a therapist to help me go back into the past and work out why I was doing these particular things. And so from that aspect, I think going back in your past is very useful to look at particular instances and memories and experiences that shaped who you are, because they are important. And especially when we're kids, like we are our most vulnerable when we're like, I think the age is like 0 to 7 are your like most formative years. And so it's important to explore those things with someone that's qualified if you feel like something happened that had a detrimental effect on who you are now as a person. Because when you have an experience like that, that forms a belief in your head, and that belief, unless you challenge it and deal with it, will you will carry that into your adult life. Which is why you see so many men and women that in certain circumstances behave like absolute children, because in their mind they haven't changed since that event. So I don't know, for instance, like someone doesn't want to share something like their food, for instance, and it may be because when they were a kid they were forced to share with their siblings, and it was traumatic for them in some way. And so now, having the choice as an adult to share, they don't want to, and when they're forced to, they become that 7-year-old kid because they haven't progressed beyond that point. So going back and looking into our past, I think, is very useful, but dwelling on it isn't. And that's where I can't really offer any solid yes or no to the answer, or to the question that is it a good idea to go back into our past. I think if I was forced to give an answer, I would say yes, it's a good idea to explore events and situations from our past if they were traumatic enough and with a professional, someone that's trained to deal with it. And on another note of therapy, it sometimes can take a long time to find a good therapist. So even if you've had a bad experience with a therapist before, that's just because you don't click as individuals, and that's absolutely fine. There's no hard feelings in this world. Therapists are aware of this. Go and try with someone else. I personally find it easier to talk to middle-aged women for some strange reason. And so it took me a while to figure that one out. But you might find that it's easier for you to open up to men, or it's easier to open up to older women like me, or younger men, whatever. But you just need to find the right person for you. But yes, so it is good to go back into your past. It is good to explore these traumatic events, unpack the lessons or the stories that you learned to tell yourself back then, and to challenge them, and to realise that these things aren't true anymore. And you are an adult now, you're a child, you're not a child, and things have changed dramatically. So yes, it's a good idea to go back into the past. It is a bad idea to dwell on the past. And I would say that if you find yourself dwelling on the past often, that there is a lesson or something there that you need to learn. The other thing I've noticed, and I did this a lot as well when I was younger, is blaming people. And particularly when we look back on our past as kids, it's very easy to blame our parents for the things that they did. There are exceptions to what I'm about to say. There are people that have had very traumatic childhoods. I totally get that. I'm talking about the vast majority of us that feel like we weren't loved enough or encouraged enough or fostered enough as children, and that may be the reason why we are the way we are today. Firstly, even if that's true, there's nothing you can do about it, and you can't spend your life blaming other people for the situation you're in, because ultimately the only thing that's going to change going forward, or change your life going forward and change your life in a way that you want it to change, is by making different decisions to the ones you've made in the past. So blaming people is a dangerous game, and it's a no-win game, because all that happens is you end up holding on to a lot of resentment for that person or people, and it's not useful for them because you're not hurting them. They probably aren't even aware that you're feeling this resentment. And it's also detrimental to you, because what good does it do to hold on to all this negative energy? It doesn't do you any favours. So forgiveness in that sense is really useful. So I think that going back in the past can be incredibly useful if done with the right people, but dwelling on it is harmful. And I think that's the bottom line. I think that's the conclusion that I've drawn from this, and it's what's worked for me in the past, is find someone that you like to talk to, someone that's unbiased. Talk to them, unpack those things, challenge those limiting beliefs that you have, and then get on with your life. Pick the direction that you want to head in, and start moving towards there, and stop looking back, because I guess it's like driving a car. If you spent your whole life looking in the rearview mirror, you're probably going to have an accident, and you are almost certainly not going to get where you want to go.